My name's Stacy Seabrook, and I approve Eric Jose on Making a Murderer to be able to use my songs on his channel. Thank you.
How do you pay a bill for someone you owe 36 million? You don't, it might as well be a bajillion. Oh, this is what you do. You charge the one you owe with murder. The debt goes to.
Hello everybody, this is Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases, but also as time passes I've been covering other cases such as the Staircase or OJ and many wrongful convictions of youth. I go over the documents, the photos, the videos, anything case related, so stay tuned because I have many more videos just like the one you're about to see. Hello everybody. Hey, just wanted to briefly explain what you were seeing there at the beginning. With Stacy Seabrook obviously giving permission for his music to be played on this channel. And the reason why that is because him and I are having a little bit of trouble with TuneCore, which is the company that helps him upload to iTunes and everything, so that you can all see it all on iTunes and have it on your phones on iTunes and stuff, which is cool, and I want you all to have that. But what it's creating a problem for us right now is it's creating a problem because there's a copyright conflict now because he has uploaded these tunes to TuneCore and TuneCore is not quite on board yet with what's happening here. So while we're ironing that out, we're going to be having that little disclaimer from Stacy himself at the beginning of each video to authorize his music to be played here. And also, we're going to stick to the acoustic stuff for a little while, his earlier stuff the way it was before he went into the studio. And by doing that, we're gonna try to avoid any more trouble with TuneCore until we can get this all ironed out and resolved. So that's where we're at. Just wanted you all to understand what that was about, why it was there, and why it was important. So let's move on to it. Hello there, everybody. How you doing? We're here today talking about the affidavit from John DeHaan. He is one of the experts that Zellner brought in, and he is an expert on cremains and you know, just when it comes to burned human remains, this guy is a very huge expert, independent forensics examiner, also a criminalist, anyway, very qualified guy. You'll see that coming up in the video. It's going to be talking about a lot of things. It's going to be talking about the fact that only 40 to 60% of the bones were found over in the burn pit. How that kind of indicates that really probably was not the original burn site, but where the bones got dumped from the original burn site, and why he gives his reasoning why that is. He doesn't say it's 100% of the time. He admits that, but he says generally most of the time in this, you know, when you find the bones like this, but then he doesn't just rely on that. He goes into where all the bones that were found in all the various places that they were found that were of the same, burned to the point of having the same degree of calcination, that he brings that into it, and to further illustrate why he believes that the bones were dumped in Stephen Avery's burn pit. So he goes through quite a few things here. It's very interesting, and obviously most of you will probably know that the bones are a pretty big deal for me. I'm always been just not good with the way that the bones are, because the biggest thing for me is if she's burned in Stephen Avery's burn pit, as the prosecution would have you believe, how do bones get from his burn pit into the Dassey burn barrel? How did that happen? Okay, granted, even though it's a really serious reach to say that an animal drug a bone, like a piece of hip bone and another piece of bone that were actually still like mechanically connected, like until they picked it up and it fell apart basically, but there was like still some tissue there holding this hip bone and another bone together basically. It's hard for me to believe an animal drug a bone out of Stephen Avery's burn pit all the way over there with it still mechanically intact when it falls apart when they find it. But even if we do accept that, how did bones get into the Dassey burn barrel? Because I don't believe an animal drug bones into a burn barrel. I would maybe believe an animal maybe drug bones out of a burn barrel. I could maybe go with that, But I can't see any reason why a animal would be dragging bones from one place and into a burn barrel. That just doesn't make sense. So, it just doesn't make sense. The prosecution's theory of what happened doesn't make sense. So, anyways, we're going to go ahead and get on into the affidavit of John DeHaan here. And it's interesting stuff. We'll go ahead and start where we did with Mr. Gershman. Why should we listen to Mr. DeHaan? Who is Mr. DeHaan, and why does his opinion matter at all when it comes to burned cremains? Right? Okay. Fair question. So let's find out right here. I, John D. DeHaan, Ph.D., am currently an independent forensic scientist fire consultant. A copy of my CV is attached as Exhibit A in this affidavit. In the course of my professional practice, I have been a forensic scientist / criminalist since 1970. Have served with the Alameda County Sheriff's Department, California Department of Justice, Bureau of Forensic Services, and the U.S. Treasury Department, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. I have served as the president of FireX Forensics, Inc., since its incorporation in January of 1999. I have been involved with various aspects of fire and explosion investigations since 1971. In the past 12 years, I have testified as an expert witness in over 50 cases. Information about those cases is listed in Exhibit A. In the past 30 years, I have authored a major textbook, co-authored one textbook, chapters in 3 textbooks, and over 30 articles. The titles are listed in my CV, Exhibit A. I have been retained by Kathleen Zellner and Associates, PC, to review all of the available evidence in the above captioned case, including trial testimony, police reports, maps, photographs, animated reconstructions, and forensic anthropology reports pertaining to the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the skeletal remains of Teresa Halbach on the Avery Salvage Yard. A list of materials I reviewed is attached as Exhibit B in this affidavit. All opinions expressed in this affidavit are based on a review of the materials submitted to date and reliable published data, as well as extensive personal knowledge of laboratory analysis, fire dynamics, ignition processes, flame speed, fire growth, and fire and explosion indicators. They are expressed in a reasonable degree of scientific certainty based upon my expertise in the field of forensic fire and fire debris examination. If additional information becomes available that has a bearing on these conclusions will be amended or supplemented appropriately. Okay, so there's Mr. DeHaan's qualifications. So he's had pretty extensive experience with this subject. So, okay, let's move on to the next bit. Now we're going to see him talking about, you know, Leslie Eisenberg's findings, and he's going to basically say that there was only 40 to 60% of the bones found in Stephen's Pit. He's going to talk about the bones found in a burn barrel. He's going to talk about the bones being found at the quarry pile, but he's going to point out that Leslie Eisenberg supposedly said she couldn't identify those bones as being human, which is quite odd. But he says, but she did say at trial that they were calcined in precisely the same way that all of Teresa's bones were in Stephen's Pit. So they had degraded the fire. A fire had caused them to degrade in exactly the same way, to the same exact extent as the bones that were in Stephen's burn pit. So that's what this expert is basically looking at, going, look, I believe that this is one of the human bones. And he's basically, you know, he's just saying this so that people understand why he's saying that, because even though for some reason Leslie Eisenberg tried to, I guess, not want to step too far and say that bone was human, but he feels pretty sure about it, especially, you know, like I said, especially because it seems like the fact that the calcination was so exactly the same, that leads him to believe that it was burned with all the other bones that have the same degree of calcination. So we'll move into this document now. The fragmentary skeletal remains examined by Dr. Eisenberg constituted only an estimated fraction from 40 to 60% of the total mass of expected skeletal remains from a person of Teresa Halbach's size. Dr. Eisenberg determined that the defects observed in the cranial fragments from Stephen Avery's burn pit which were linked to gunshot wounds through the examination of radiopaque particles observed in radiographs, were created before the burning event. Dr. Eisenberg was unable to determine with any certainty whether the bone fragments in tag 8675, which appeared to be from a pelvis, were human in origin. However, Dr. Eisenberg testifies that these bone fragments were burned and calcined to the same degree as the bones recovered from the Stephen Avery's burn pit. Further, Dr. Eisenberg identified the two bones recovered from the Manitowoc County gravel pit were still articulated. That is, that they were still had like kind of some ligaments maybe or something, that the bones were still mechanically holding together. So that's interesting. Okay, so we see him bringing up the fact that there were only 40 to 60% of Teresa's bones found in that burn pit. Okay, if you remember, the defense's expert at trial claimed, because he had experience with remains being burnt and being moved, so he had experience with second and or multiple burials or multiple burn sites. So even he said that is usually an indicator when you have that approximate percentage of the bones left, that usually is a pretty huge indicator that the bones have been moved from the original burn location. So that is where these two gentlemen seem to agree. So that's corroborative, and to me that's significant. So then you see in here where he's talking about this hip bone. This hip bone that she said she couldn't definitively say was human or not, but that she did go on to say it was calcined in just exactly the same degree as Teresa's bones were in Stephen Avery's burn pit. So the fact that they had the same level of degradation kind of suggests that they were together, and the fact that this hip bone, it was still articulated with another piece of bone that was still somehow staying mechanically attached somehow, or maybe some ligaments were just barely holding it in place still, something, but it was actually, when they found it, still kind of mechanically attached. What's significant about that is that when you move bones, that's when they tend to lose those attachments, and they get, they break up, and the joints come apart because the ligaments and everything, they're all burned and dried up and basically almost turning to dust. Well, they disintegrate when you move the stuff, and the bones start falling apart. So the fact that this bone, in my mind, the fact that this bone is found over there at the quarry still mechanically intact means that is a bone that didn't get disturbed. It got left there, and it didn't get moved too much, and therefore it still had a mechanical attachment. So that's just that's my opinion by reading what Mr. DeHaan has to say, but I'll let you guys make your own decisions, of course. Let's move on to the next document. Teresa Halbach's body was not burned in the burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage. It is further my opinion that the body was not burned in the burn pit. This is based on the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the remains, the findings of similarly charred calcined fragments in burn barrels and other locations on the property, and the absence of the more massive fragments that normally resist such exposure. I disagree with Dr. Eisenberg's opinion that the main destruction of the body took place in the pit. Based merely on the amounts of remains recovered from the pit compared to the small fragments found elsewhere in two locations, one being a burn barrel from behind Barb Yonda's residence and the other a burn site in Manitowoc County gravel pit. On this issue, I agree with Dr. Fairgreaves' testimony that the location where most of the burned remains are found is not in itself proof of the location of the fire that destroyed the body. I have observed transfers of heavily burned remains under a variety of conditions that resulted in the largest amount of the fragmentary remains being transferred to another location, with the loss of anatomical relationships. As stated above, the reported lack of anatomical continuity of the human bones recovered from Stephen Avery's burn pit indicates that Teresa Halbach's body was not burned there. Therefore, it is my opinion that someone transferred Teresa Halbach's bones to Stephen Avery's burn pit. the discovery of larger fragments outside of the margins of the burn pit, and the finding of the human bone fragments with similar degrees of fire damage in numerous other areas, including burn barrels on the site, it is also consistent with the dumping of burned remains into the pit with some rolling away. I have observed the survival of numerous calcined small bones after being dumped from a burn barrel or a similar enclosure onto a tarp or examination table. It should be noted that there are numerous steel vessels on the salvage yard and surrounding properties that could have been used to burn a human body. These were not examined. The wood-fueled boiler and smelter were examined by S.A. Pevito, and no residues were detected there. The state's theory of burning is incorrect. From my review of documents provided me, the state represented to the jury that Miss Halbach's body was burned in an open-air burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage from around 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 31st of 2005, a period of only 4 hours. Based upon my review of the descriptions and photographs of the bone fragments analyzed by Dr. Eisenberg, the state's theory is not supported by the physical evidence. As described above, burning a body in an open-air pit takes 6 to 8 hours to accomplish thermal destruction to the degree I observed in Dr. Eisenberg's reports and photos. It is my opinion that the burned bones found in Stephen Avery's burn pit could not have been burned to the degree I observed after 4 hours of burning in an open-air pit like the one behind Stephen Avery's garage. It is my opinion that the state's theory was also incorrect in its assertion that the burned vehicle bench seat was used to fuel the burning of Miss Halbach's body. The burned remains of the bench seat were not found in the burn pit, but near it. Its involvement in an external fire to aid the combustion of a body in the burn pit is speculative and unsupported by any document I have reviewed. It is my opinion that the state's theory was also incorrect in its assertion that burned bones were intertwined with metal belts resulting from the burning of tires with the body. The state represented to the jury that the bones were fused with the metal belts in a manner that suggested that the tires from which the steel belts came were burned with the body and in Mr. Avery's burn pit. Based upon my review of the photographs taken on November 8th of 2005 and November 10th of 2005 on the occasion of the second excavation of Stephen Avery's burn pit, the bone fragments appeared to be simply mixed among the metal belts. I have had personal experience with the burning steel belted automobile tires in combination with human bodies. During fire exposure, the steel multi-strand wires degrade, break, and fray to form bristles that readily trap any material that comes into contact with them during or after the fire. Small calcined bone fragments are especially easy to trap. This has been observed in test fires where the tires were under or alongside a burned body as well as on top. It should be noted that S.A. Sturdivant, Special Investigator Sturdivant, noted that the guard dog's lead was sufficiently long enough to allow him to reach the burn pit. Some of it, anyway. A quantity of the tire wires belting was observed to be tangled in with the dog's lead at one point. The recovery of item 7946, commingled metal, battery jumper cables, and dog leash recovered adjacent to the burn pit appears to confirm that. Dragging the tire remains across the burned debris fragments after the fire would result in the accumulation of fragments in the wire. The burn pit may have been used previously to dispose of tires, and the oily black residue described by Special Investigator Pevito as lining the pit in the excavation of the 10th of November 2005 would support that. So there was no evidence that the entrapment of the debris occurred during the fire that consumed the remains. From my review of these photographs, the reports generated by law enforcement agents at the scene, and Dr. Eisenberg in later examinations, there is nothing to suggest that the tires were in fact burned with the human bones recovered in Stephen Avery's burn pit in the manner described by the state. Okay, folks, so there we have it. There we have it. KZ's expert, bone expert, is basically telling us what we already basically know. We could tell from watching MAM. Even Leslie Eisenberg said bones were moved. However, she said they were moved from the burn pit to inside of a burn barrel. Ridiculous, ridiculous. Okay, I could have possibly believed an animal might have dragged bones to, say, the quarry pile. Okay, not if those bones were articulated. Still, two bones were articulated together. No, upon getting dragged, there would no longer be any attachment between the two separate bones. But I could believe that possibly an animal could have dragged it to the quarry pile and left it there, but I would not in a million years be able to buy the story that an animal drug a bone from Stephen's burn pit into a burn barrel over at Barb's. No. Sorry. Not happening. So, we have all three. Even we have the two that were at Stephen's trial that agreed bones were moved. And now we have this third one, KZ's expert, Mr. DeHaan, who now agrees that bones were moved, and he basically confirms what the defense expert said at trial, that when you find the approximate percentage of 40 to 60% of the bones, you basically get an indication right there that these bones have been moved. Because if it was the original burn site, you would have something close to, you know, between like 85 and 95% of the bones, or like 80 and 95% of the bones. But when you end up having something so low as 40 to 60, you know that you have most of the bones there, but there's probably another site where some got left behind. And that's why you have a significantly lower percentage, but you still have most of the bones. So he basically confirms what the defense expert said at trial. And, you know, this is obvious. The fact that the state is still resisting this and doesn't understand people's issue with the bones is just mind-boggling to me. That I don't believe that they don't understand our problem with the bones. I believe that they just don't want to deal with it. That they don't want to have to. They just hope that this all goes away. You know, Ken Kratz is at CrimeCon today, you know, talking, you know, saying something, you know, is he talking about the Avery case? You know, because after my video that I just did, you know, right? That if he's still talking about the Avery case at this point, that the Kathleen Zellner's expert on prosecutorial misconduct has already stated that the more that Ken Kratz continues to go on talking about this case and defaming Stephen Avery and everything, is just more and more prosecutorial misconduct. Even though he's no longer a prosecutor, it's bad ethics for him to continue to do what he's doing. So maybe he's not talking about making a murderer over at CrimeCon, but I saw a tweet that would seem to suggest differently. But hey, the point is that, you know, he probably is over there just talking about Stephen Avery's case. And we'll probably find out what it is he's saying later. But anyways, so what we've got here is that another bone expert that has basically confirmed these bones moved. These bones they did not start in Stephen Avery's burn pit. And the fact that we have that bone over at the quarry that was still articulated. Okay? Now I know a lot of the people who believe that Stephen is guilty are going to say, oh no, that bone wasn't human. Leslie Eisenberg said that bone wasn't human. Yes, but she also said it was calcined to the same exact extent as the bones that were found, Teresa's bones that were found in Stephen Avery's burn pit. That exact level of calcination, that same exact level of degradation, suggests to me that they started together. Okay, and the fact that those two bones there at the gravel pile were still articulated, still kind of together, tells me that they were probably the least disturbed of the bones, and that is probably pretty close to the starting point of where these bones began. So, I think this guy's great, Mr. Dr. DeHaan. You know, John DeHaan here, PhD. Stellar observations, and like I said, it seems to go along with what the previous expert has said, and so therefore it is corroborative and gives it a little bit more weight. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you later. Okay, so that wraps it up for the expert opinion of John DeHaan. He's the Cremains expert. You know, that's the expert in burned human remains. He, you know, clearly states his opinions here. You know, the fact that he initially points to the fact that yes, the 40 to 60% percentage of bones in the burn pit does actually coincide with the reasoning that they were dumped there. He admits that alone isn't, you know, 100%, but he goes on to talk about how the bones that were found in the Dassey burn barrel, the Manitowoc County gravel pit, and these other spots where these bones were found, they all have the same degree of calcination. Basically, which is the degradation to the bones when they are in a fire, and they all have that same exact degree of degradation. So that's what he's pointing to, the fact that this also all suggests that these bones did not burn in Stephen Avery's burn pit, that they originated elsewhere. Further adding to that is the fact that the bones, the hip bone and whatever found over in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, were actually still like kind of connected physically, like by tissue or whatever, until they started picking it up, and I guess it started falling apart, of course. But as it sat there, the things were still looking like they were mechanically kind of connected still. So that's interesting. That suggests that bone really didn't move, because had it been moved from its original spot, it would have probably fallen apart. It's at least the way I see it. So hope you guys found this interesting. As you know, I'm revisiting all of these affidavits and trying to reissue them here for those of you who just came off of MAM2 and didn't get to see all this stuff when it was happening. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys are getting a lot of info out of it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. We'll see ya.